make way for Mike Florio, the popular co-host of Pro Football Talk Live. He also has a new book coming out, Father of Mine. It's next Tuesday, and it's only $4.99. Mike is he's a best-selling author. Of course, you know, we had Playmakers. Now I think he's branching out here. What's the theme of Father of Mine there, Mike?
Mob novel set back in 1973, Dan, and the setting is the town I grew up in, 60 miles from Pittsburgh, where the mob was prevalent. My dad was actually a bookie who was connected to the mob, but I will say this, there have been no omertas violated in the crafting of this piece. I do not want to end up sleeping with the fishes or anything else that may be sleeping at the bottom of a body of water. So I think I'm covered there. I think everybody who was involved is dead now, so I won't be, hopefully.
What did you see growing up?
I saw some wild stuff, and I didn't think anything of it because it was normal to me. My dad had a bar, and I would go in there from time to time, meet the different guys, and they're always nice to you. You're 8, 9, 10 years old. You're a little kid. But there were other places I'd go with my dad, and just that mystery, that smell, the beer and the cigarettes, and you're walking among the bar stools. Bruce Springsteen explains it in his autobiography, Going into the World of Men. When you're a little kid, he used to have to go fetch his dad from the bar, and that's kind of what it was like. But as I got older, and I would see newspaper accounts of what some of these guys that I used to see all the time allegedly or actually did. That's an eye-opener. So, especially as I wrote this, I did some research about what that crew actually or allegedly did back in the day. And it's like, man, there's some bad dudes that I probably would have run the other direction if I had only known back when I was 8, 9, 10 years old what they were capable of.
People get murdered?
Oh, yeah. Allegedly or actually or otherwise.
Oh. All right, so that's next Tuesday, Florio's book, Father of Mine, and only $4.99, available wherever you get your books. Okay, a few things to talk to you about. Ian Rappaport had a tweet saying that the Niners are fielding calls for Trey Lance. What is the market for Trey Lance, and what would it cost to get Trey Lance?
First of all, when a report is made that a team is fielding calls, we know it's coming from the team. The team wants it out there. And sometimes the truth is that the team is actually making the calls, but they are very careful to tell the reporter it's fielding because you give up any leverage you have if you look desperate that you're making these calls. But Dan, it's obvious. The ship has sailed. Trey Lance isn't the guy. Brock Purdy is. And the moment he's healthy, he's the starter. And I feel like Trey Lance, if he's there in San Francisco, is going to be competing with Sam Darnold for number 2, not Purdy for number 1. So the market ultimately is what it is. What the 49ers learned the hard way, they were a little too stubborn with what they wanted for Jimmy Garoppolo. They kept their thumb on the scale. They ultimately weren't able to trade him. Now, it worked out because they needed him when Trey Lance broke his ankle. But I think that what they need to do is see what happens first couple rounds of the draft, see where the quarterbacks go or don't go. And I don't know, do you get a second rounder next year? Do you get something conditional based on whether he plays, how much he plays, some sort of a formula like what the Jets and Packers are trying to work out for Aaron Rodgers? But I don't think it's much. And they're going to push the idea. They're going to try to save some face. And they may end up not being able to get a deal done if they want more than what anyone is willing to give. Because what do you give for a guy who has played very little football, Dan, in the last 3 years? 2020, pandemic restricted the North Dakota State season to just like a couple of games. Didn't play in 21, hardly played in 22. What are you getting in a guy who's still fairly young, but who hasn't played much football in 3 years?
You mentioned Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, and I don't know if we're on the same page, but it feels like it might be day 2 of the draft. Can the Jets hold off giving the first-round pick this year and then say, we'll give you a second-round pick this year and then a first round next year to the Packers, and then this is completed?
I think the only thing they agree on for now, Dan, is that the pick this year would be one of the 2 second-rounders the Jets currently have. Back-to-back from the Elijah Moore trade to Cleveland. They've got back-to-back picks, I think 43 and 44. Mm-hmm. And the question is, what do the Packers get in 2024? What do the Jets get in 2025 if Aaron Rodgers were to retire after only one season? I think that's part of this equation as well. And because we're so close to the second day of the draft now, there's no reason for either side to move to their bottom line now. They wait until the last minute, the plane lands, they find a way to make their two positions meet. And I've said the over-under is 6 o'clock Eastern, Friday the 28th. There's a chance they get it worked out late afternoon just to be done. Yeah. There's also a chance it happens when the pick in round 2 that's going to the Packers is actually on the clock, that the trade occurs during round 2 of the draft.
Okay, so we're on the same page that this first-round pick for the Jets is not going to Green Bay.
Not going to Green Bay.
Okay. But it'll be a second-round pick or maybe a couple of picks. But there has to be some kind of conditional language in here, as you mentioned, with Rodgers, because I'd still have trepidation if I'm the Jets. This is a guy who said he was 90% retired before he went into the dark hole. And now you're going to give up a second-round pick and then a first-round pick or whatever it might be. But I'm going to guess that kind of language will be in this transaction.
Well, yes, that's what the Jets are trying to protect themselves against. And look, there's a chance that Aaron Rodgers wasn't telling the truth when he said he was 90% retired, because it's part of this broader narrative that I was just going to walk off into the sunset. I thought the Packers wanted me back. And then I heard that they were shopping me, and that's when everything changed. It makes for a great story, regardless of whether or not it's true. This 90% thing may have just been him trying to fashion a greater myth than what reality would support. And the consequence is it's freaked out the Jets to the point where they're concerned he's going to be one and done in New York. And when Tom Brady first joined the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one of the greatest business objectives of ownership was make sure he comes back for another year. Make sure he comes back. And I think the Jets will bend over backwards to try to make sure there's a second year for Aaron Rodgers. And the Jets want that protection in 25 in the event that Rodgers is one and done. And who knows? We didn't expect Favre to be one and done with the Jets, and he was.
The Demar Hamlin situation, he's already won Comeback Player of the Year. If you come back from death twice, I'm guessing that you'll be the Comeback Player of the Year. What kind of language will be in that contract? Is there an addendum to his contract with the Buffalo Bills with him coming back? I mean, how does the team protect itself?
Well, I think that he's cleared. He's back and he's playing. He's only entering his third season. So it's not even as if they could do a new contract for Demar Hamlin. His existing contract is still in place. The question is, once he's physically cleared, mentally, what's it going to be like for him to put his uniform on and go back out onto a football field? I don't even know how much he remembers about what happened. Maybe there is no PTSD or scarring of him that he would have to overcome, because for the rest of us, when he walks out on the field, we're gonna hold our breath every time he's involved in a tackle. We're gonna wait and make sure he's okay. I just think that's human nature. But given that it apparently is commotio cordis, this very rare occasion of getting struck in the chest and your heart stops, and it happens to anybody, and it happens very infrequently. It's not some condition he has. It sounds like he's good to go. It really is amazing that we're less than 4 months from the thing happening, and he is good to go, clean bill of health, back on the Bills, and they go forward.
But, Mike, it sounds strange to say this, but I'm more concerned for Tua Tagovailoa than I am Demar Hamlin.
I think you're absolutely right to be. Tua Tagovailoa is a guy who is smaller than most quarterbacks. The physics aren't on his side. And what have we seen? We haven't seen him get drilled in the head by somebody who drops their helmet and hits a quarterback the way they used to. We see him get shoved to the ground. And what happens when he hits the ground? His helmet strikes the turf and he gets a concussion. It happened at least 2 times. Most of us with common sense believe it happened 3 times last year, despite the official claim that it was a back injury. So he's working on falling the right way. He's studying jiu-jitsu. It's one thing to study it. It's another thing to put it into practice when you're out on the field. That's what I'd be concerned about. I'm concerned about that for Bryce Young. He's going to be under 200 pounds when he plays. Can he fall in a way that doesn't result in his head striking the turf and giving him a brain injury? I'm far more concerned about Tua than I am Demar Hamlin.
But aren't they developing? We're talking to Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk. Are they developing a new helmet just for quarterbacks?
Yeah, that's got a greater level of protection in the back of the helmet. So when that bone hits the ground, because that's what we see, the head snaps back and the bone hits, what can they do to keep the brain from being injured? But, the bottom line, Dan, is you can wear the best helmet in the world, but when your body is moving and suddenly stops, your brain bounces off the inside. There's nothing you can do about the brain bouncing off the inside of the skull. There's still going to be concussions in football, but you can reduce the severity of the blow that comes from the outside.
Any doubts on Jalen Hurts?
I don't think so. Not after what we saw last year and this contract. Now, I'm still waiting for the deal to be officially done. Once it's done, we'll be able to look at the full details. We'll see what the true commitment is. And most importantly, when does the window open on the Eagles getting out of it if for some reason he regresses? Look at what Russell Wilson did last year or didn't do in Denver. The Broncos would love to be able to tear that up. They can't because of the way the contract is structured. There's so many clues that come from the full details that tell us when the Eagles would be able to say, oops, got that wrong. We're going to move on. Yeah. But there's no reason to think he's not going to get better. We saw a Josh Allen type jump from him last year. Passing and running and leadership and everything the Eagles have been looking for since the moment they traded Donovan McNabb to Washington on Easter Sunday of 2010. They've been searching. They've been hoping. They thought it was Carson Wentz. It wasn't. Nick Foles, maybe. It wasn't. And now they have it in Jalen Hurts.
What's this mean for Lamar Jackson?
Well, Dan, what I would do right now, we had a breakdown yesterday of the contract Jalen Hurts accepted and the offer that Lamar Jackson rejected in August, and just some of the data points. And we broke them all down. We talked about it earlier today on PFT Live as well. What I would do if I was Lamar Jackson, first and foremost, is hire an agent. Second, I mean, he's not going to do that. I would get Odell Beckham Jr., frankly, to try to be the go-between right now. There's a hybrid deal to be done between the deal that Lamar Jackson rejected last year and the deal that Jalen Hurts is doing this week, where you can slap the two together and you can come up with something that works for Lamar Jackson. And Dan, at some point, regardless of what anyone thinks about the whys and what's at play and what factors are being involved, at some point, Lamar Jackson's got to say yes. He's got to say yes to something. Yeah. And you have to look at what's out there. It's as good as it's going to get, and you just have to say yes and continue your career. And if you don't, your career doesn't continue. It's stuck in the mud until you finally say yes to something.
But, Mike, he would have already been, 2 years into his old contract, and then we would be 2 years later, now you're into a new contract. You're always going to be underpaid a couple of years or a year after you sign your contract in your mind.
Right, but Dan, here's the bottom line. If he had done the deal that Josh Allen did 2 years ago, they were drafted the same year. Allen did his contract after 3 seasons. And I remember when the word first broke of the Josh Allen contract, I said, I want to see that deal, because when we see the details, it's either going to be the player or the team in Baltimore that wants to take that contract and make it the contract for Lamar Jackson. When I saw that deal, I said, Lamar Jackson should take this to the Ravens and say, just cross out the names, change them. This is my contract. Yeah. And when you look at what Josh Allen has gotten the last 2 years and what Lamar Jackson has gotten, Josh Allen has made $41 million more than Lamar Jackson in the last 2 years. And that's never coming back. I don't care what you get paid going forward. That $41 million is never coming back. Those days are done and over. You never get paid for what you've previously done. You only get paid for the future. So already he's $41 million behind Josh Allen. And the question is, how much worse is it going to get?
The Panthers GM says that he hasn't told anybody who will be the number one pick, although Bryce Young has canceled all of his other trips elsewhere, which would lead me to believe. I think the draft starts at 2. Because I don't know if the Texans are sold on a quarterback here. Feels like Bryce Young's going number 1 overall, correct?
Yeah, and it was a great point that our coordinating producer at PFT Live, Matt Casey, texted in while we were talking about it today, because we played the sound of Scott Fitterer, the GM of the Panthers, talking about what they plan to do to put weight on Bryce Young. And the way he talked about it, when you listen to it, it sounds like it's not a hypothetical. It sounds like this is what we're going to do.
But do you think the commissioner has said to Carolina, just don't say anything here?
Dan, I look at it this way. If they're not bashful about calling their broadcast partners and instructing them to tell their reporters to keep their mouths shut about anything they know about who the picks are going to be, they're probably not bashful about telling the teams. Yeah, they want people to tune in for 8 o'clock to 8:20. They don't want people tuning in for the Texans pick. They want people to be there at 8 o'clock thinking maybe there's a chance it's not going to be Bryce Young.
Okay, what do the Texans do? Do you believe the draft starts at 2?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they could trade out of that spot, obviously. They could trade down. And for a team that has plenty of needs, if you're not talking about going down many picks and you pick up some extra significant draft capital, that goes a long way toward blowing the fact that they could have had the first overall pick if they just hadn't beaten the Colts in the fourth quarter of Week 18. Yeah. So it's either quarterback, edge rusher, or trade down. And you got to consider who their coach is now. Yeah. DeMeco Ryans. Where'd he come from? San Francisco. Let's go back to what we already talked about. Ryan's first year as defensive coordinator, they give up 3 1s and a 3 to get Trey Lance. How'd that work out? Second year, they take a flyer with the last pick in the draft on Brock Purdy. How'd that work out? What do you think Ryans wants? Do you think Ryans wants a guy who could be their Nick Bosa and an edge rusher at number 2? Or does Ryans want to put all the eggs in a quarterback basket and have it possibly blow up on them? So he may be pushing defensive player to supercharge that side of the ball. You can get a quarterback later. Or, and I always advocate this because in my mind, the draft is a lottery. The more lottery tickets you have, the better chance you have to get players that turn around, especially a bad team. Trade down if you can, get more picks.
Explain the new Wonderlic, or is it the new Wonderlic, the S2 test for players, quarterbacks?
Well, the S2 test, as I understand it, is about cognitive ability in the heat of the moment, processing information when you're in that blender of factors. You think about everything a quarterback has to deal with, pre-snap, post-snap, all the information about processing, recall, and Bryce Young did really well on it, and the Panthers are big believers in it, specifically their owner, David Tepper. So this is a way unique to quarterbacks. When you are the one who is standing there, where all that stuff's happening, think about all the variables. Which receiver's open? Who's blitzing? Can I trust my running back to pick this guy up? Who else is coming around? So they're using that. Now, the Wonderlic is worthless. This, to the extent that there's a dotted line or a bright line connection, helps teams understand how that guy's going to do when it's time to stand in there and decide where to throw the football.
Always great to talk to you. He's Mike Florio in his new book about his father, who was a bookie and probably saw some bad people in Pittsburgh.
That's all fictional.
That's not the official title. It's just called Father of Mine. Not Father of Mine, who was a bookie who saw bad things happen with the mob in Pittsburgh. Allegedly.
Correct. Or possibly.
Available next Tuesday. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Mike. My bookie was, he was known locally and a very upstanding businessman. And I remember he drove a Lincoln Continental, a Mark III. It was a blue Mark III. And there's a reason why he drove that and lived in a real nice house, because bookies make the money